Hello, delighted to be joined today by Daniel Litvin, founder of Critical Resource and also valued member of the Mining Indaba Sustainability Committee. Daniel, great to have you here today.
Great to be here, Carl.
Daniel, I wanted to ask, there's a lot of geopolitical conflict happening across the world at the moment. Would you see this as now a big issue for large companies?
It is. I mean, I think for the CEOs of big companies, there's all sorts of things that can keep them awake at night. But I think geopolitics is now probably right at the top of the list. As everyone who's listening to this will be well aware, there's wars raging currently in the Middle East, in Ukraine. You've got growing a great power conflict between America and China. You've got a whole host of other influential countries, whether it's India or Brazil or South Africa, that are working out where they fit in this, I guess, new world which is often now being called a multipolar world as opposed to a unipolar world. What's going on in terms of the wars is obviously deeply tragic. What it means for big companies is also hugely significant. If they understand and work well this what you might call the geopolitical great game, it can work to their advantage. But equally, if they play it wrong and they end up on the wrong side of geopolitical divides, there's billions of dollars of value potentially at stake for them. The trouble is for the leaders of companies, whether it's mining or other companies, this is, it's very complicated. Because it's now a multipolar world, there's all sorts of moves that different countries can make that make the whole system, I think, inherently unpredictable. It's often said that running a big company is like playing a game of chess. You have to understand the moves of your player. You have to think very hard. I think in the world now, for big companies, it's a bit like playing a game of three-dimensional or even four-dimensional chess. There's a lot going on. It's very complex. Yeah. It's very difficult to know what might happen next.
You talk about these moves. Do you have any specific advice for mining companies in this environment?
Well, in a way, because now geopolitics is so important, I think the heads of mining companies and their teams need to be almost like mini Henry Kissingers. And Henry Kissinger is obviously, it has been a controversial figure, but for all sorts of reasons, but was a sort of a master geopolitical strategist. And I think that's what the leaders of big mining companies these days need to be. What in practical terms does that mean? I think it means, first of all, understanding incredibly well what or how the geopolitical landscape might evolve, taking time to develop scenarios, to bring in different perspectives so it's really understood how the world looks, not just from Washington or London or Paris, but from other capitals around the world. So really deepening understanding, really building that understanding then into corporate strategy, because how the geopolitical landscape will evolve it has the potential to either create or wipe out billions of dollars of commercial value. It should be driving, at least in part, where mining companies choose to invest, what assets they choose to develop, which parts of the world. It should also be determining, to a degree, where they see their customer base, what they think is a secure customer base over the long term. And then I think thirdly, companies need to invest quite a lot in their diplomatic capabilities. Mining companies in general have long experience, many decades of experience of this, but I think they now need to bolster it further, that capacity to engage effectively with governments, whether it's governments of their home countries or governments of host countries, to navigate this really complicated landscape.
No, I think government relations is more important than ever. I'd like to go back to, you mentioned a few times, current geopolitical rivalries. Do you see this as good or bad for minerals in Africa?
Well, clearly, with the energy transition and the huge volumes of critical minerals, copper, lithium, cobalt, et cetera, that will be needed to drive the energy transition, and the fact that Africa is rich in many of these mineral resources, on the face of it, presents a huge opportunity. However, if you look at history and past periods where there's been intense rivalry between great powers, that has been quite often disastrous for resource-rich regions of the world. Africa has its own tragic history of the scramble for Africa over a century ago, of course, in the late 19th century, when the great European powers scrambled for Africa's resources, which was a tragedy for populations in Africa in all sorts of ways. Likewise, if you look at the history of oil in the Middle East in the 20th century, a very similar situation, or many parallels of great powers, in this case America and European powers, jostling for control over resources, leading to all sorts of, people will know their history well, conflicts, coups. In short, the history shows that when great powers try to secure control over minerals, whether it's fossil fuels or other sorts of minerals, the result is often negative for the countries, the resource-rich countries concerned. There is an opportunity here, like I said, but it needs to be managed in a very, very, smart way by the countries concerned.
You talk about managing it in a smart way. What do you think African governments can do to turn this to their advantage?
Look, it's not, in a sense, not my position to, I don't want to be presumptuous to advise African governments what to do. I think they know very well. But I think the very basic lesson is to try their best to ensure that this becomes a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom. In other words, that the countries and companies that they choose to have as partners are the ones that are bringing the greatest long-term benefits, whether it's in terms of job creation, local and national economic development, management of all the potential negative impacts of mining, whether it's on biodiversity or water and all the health and safety issues as well. So in other words, the countries need to ensure that this is a race to the top between the different great powers who want access to their minerals, as opposed to a race to the bottom, which has happened in the past, where it's the those external countries with the greatest diplomatic muscle, those offering the greatest short-term, monetary benefits, and caring much less about the long-term developmental issues. So engineering the game. The phrase "the great game" is often used when it comes to this, making sure this is a great game of a race to the top, not a race to the bottom.
It's very interesting. To focus on a specific aspect from a different angle, how worried do you think Western governments should be about China weaponizing its control of many critical mineral supply chains?
Well, so this fear about China and its control of, as you say, many critical mineral supply chains, it's become a sort of fashionable anxiety in Western capitals. And the figures are of the degree to which China particularly controls less the upstream mining of resources, but more the refining and processing of many critical minerals, does indeed indicate that, in theory, China could, use this to its political advantage. And fresh in the memory of the West is, of course, how Russia weaponized supplies of gas to Europe over the Ukraine war. And there are some instances of China, appearing to restrict exports of certain commodities with a political goal in mind. That's the sort of fashionable anxiety. How serious a worry should it be? My sense is that it's important for those in the West not to panic about this. China is sensible and smart, and it knows that, as I think Russia is finding, that if you do weaponize commodity exports or your controls of commodity mineral supply chains, there's a very big downside, which is that it accelerates the pace at which consuming countries move away. And indeed, already Western governments and companies are attempting to build their own supply chains slowly, but bit by bit getting there. But I think it's important also to recognize that China is deeply embedded in the global economy, and so it's not. Personalities can play a role, as of course Putin has in Russia, but it's important not to underestimate the interest that I think China has in not destabilizing its own economy by any rash moves.
Daniel, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank
and
you.
to everybody watching, thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you at Mining Indaba in February 2024.